Yo, 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 Treasury Talent community, welcome back to another live interview, live discussion with the Treasury Talent team. If this is your first time, we go live every single Wednesday at 2 o'clock Pacific, 3 o'clock Mountain Time, 6 o'clock Eastern, 9 o'clock AM Australian. We got you covered. This is another episode. We are the Treasury Talent team. We specialize in Treasury recruitment. Today we have a phenomenal guest with us. We're going to be talking with Olga Chin, the CEO and founder of InterPrice. And we're going to be talking about her career in banking and her journey to entrepreneurship. And she's got a killer platform she's going to introduce you guys to today that we really think is going to be disruptive to the industry. So welcome, Olga, to the show. Welcome the rest of you guys.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Yes, I'll be the one to break the silence from our side. So, Olga, we'll just jump right into it. A little bit about your background. You spent 15 years roughly in the banking industry, specializing in debt capital markets. Walk us through that career and your journey. What are some of the highlights and really just what's it been like?
What it's like to work as a banker. So I graduated from school, went into finance right away. I actually started working at the Bank of New York originally. I worked for the person who is now the Chief Risk Officer of the Bank of New York in 2005. And what we were doing back then, CLOs were like a wonderful thing, leveraged loans. So we used to invest the bank's proprietary capital into CLOs and leveraged loans. That's not really allowed anymore, but great experience. So I found out a lot about credit from that perspective. Transitioned to a hedge fund, but then in 2010 had to boom back to New York City, and I met this wonderful individual, and I'll parlay that into the conversation about DCM, named Spencer Houston. So what Spencer was doing at that time, he worked with the Bank of Tokyo. So Bank of Tokyo had this huge balance sheet, and they couldn't figure out how to get a broker-dealer license, or it was really hard to go through the process. In the middle of financial crisis, they used their balance sheet to actually purchase a fairly large stake in Morgan Stanley, which expedited the broker-dealer process. So Spencer took that, created what's at that point was known as Mitsubishi UFJ Securities, and he literally started the business of debt capital markets from scratch for the Bank of Tokyo's balance sheet. I mean, Spencer is one of those absolutely tremendous individuals. He put our bankers right there in front of the clients. We had to come up with ideas. We were the up and coming, player. Not a lot of people at that time. He was very strategic in terms of adding to the people. And I would say that, most of my career was actually spent working for Spencer and learning from him. In terms of the highlights, he literally built that business from scratch. And if you think about like when I left MUFG back in 2018, I think the revenues at that time were nearing 200 million just for the group. And so Spencer built that in a short amount of time. And the way that he did it, imagine going out with, yes, he had a balance sheet, but the world of debt capital markets is actually incredibly crowded and incredibly competitive. And Spencer was absolutely amazing and pushing his bankers to say, look, we're going to do this with ideas. We're going to come up with the best ideas for our clients. He was absolutely client-centric, and he did not necessarily want to rely on the balance sheet. Learned a lot from him. I would say that I owe Spencer pretty much everything in my career in terms of pushing me out there. I was just about 25 years old when I joined Spencer and the group. And at that point, he actually, it was funny, he initially said, we're going to go after some of the smaller players first, just because the bank lends more money to them, and so that's competitively speaking. And he said, hey, Olga, why don't you cover, Walmart's, John Deere's, Harley Davidson's, just because they're really overbanked clients. So why don't you go practice on those? Fast forward about 10 years, I've led about 10 deals for John Deere on the active side, Harley Davidson, Walmart. We did the left lead on the global yen issuance. So Spencer was definitely the highlight. But also think about, the one thing I would also mention before I answer, pause on that question is there's so much camaraderie within the DCM world, I would say. And I think outside of banking, not a whole lot of people realize, but one of the highlights was actually working, and MUFG was a really, really close team. We all had each other's back, and just working there has been an absolute pleasure. And again, I owe that to the person that's actually built that entire platform.
Olga, you're 15 years in banking, and now you've obviously gone out and started your own business, which we'll come to. But what's the one piece of advice for the younger folk out there that you wish you had have known 15 years ago that you know now?
I would say, you read, there's websites like Wall Street Oasis, right? And, a lot of the younger individuals look at it and say, oh, well, I want a career in banking. And you have this, movies that they watch, and there's perception of, who the bankers are, right? So you see these like tough individuals, they scream into the phone, they fly on the planes, and there's like glamorous lifestyle. And, me coming out of college, I would say that, part of it, yeah, that was in my head. And you get to, you go sit down at a desk, and you see your managing director who's incredibly impatient. He always wants something. You're updating his pitch books, and he is really, really, really detail oriented. And you just don't understand as a junior person just starting your career why he cares about the comma at the, or the period at the end of the sentence so much that he's so upset about it, right? And so you have this period when you first, or for me at least, and I know that a lot of my counterparts went through the same thing, the first couple of years are really tough because you just don't understand the sort of motivation. You just think that, yes, there's this banker who, a typical banker, I would say, and that is until you literally sit down in front of a client, and it's your own client. For me, that was John Deere and Walmart, and they find a mistake in whatever you did. And your heart literally drops, and you have no idea what to do. And that's the moment when you understand exactly what's the motivation behind the senior banker. You understand exactly why, they're being incredibly detail oriented. And for me, I think the biggest lesson I think I learned that I really hope, somebody very early in their career can take away perhaps from this is that look for the driving motivation behind every action, right? There's a reason that people are the way they are. Maybe they, go into this business being incredibly harsh and incredibly impatient, but there's the client, and the client coverage is the motivating factor. And I wish, for me, I kind of wish I thought more about that instead of just kind of saying, well, this is how it is, because it does get rough in the beginning. It's a huge learning curve to get up to speed, but it's incredibly a helpful experience too, in terms of even just starting what I started right now.
That's great. And how about, Olga, how have you approached networking throughout your career, and what advice do you have for our listeners around how they should approach it as well?
So this one is a tougher one. So going back to my story about Spencer, how he put us, in front of clients and said, look, we're, the underdog here. Let's come up with something incredibly creative, right? Okay, so Spencer might say that, but again, I just started covering clients. Like, what am I supposed to actually do? So I actually started asking clients a lot of questions. I would sit there and I would just like literally try to create a conversation, say, whoa, what is your pain point right now? What are you focused on? Part of it was incredibly self-serving, just because I wanted to get some sort of an idea of what they're thinking. Because I have no idea what John Deere Treasury team is thinking when I'm just an associate, right? And for me to pitch them something, I got to get some sort of feedback. And what ended up happening is that the more questions that I asked, the more, the relationship got built, and the more they told me like, oh, well, we're thinking about doing that. And I was like, well, maybe it's applicable to some other client. And so I would come up with all those ideas, and it was great. And the rest of my team members were doing the same thing. But the reality is that it all came from a lot of these networking conversations and actually caring about the clients and actually asking them questions. But most important, just like listening, to be completely honest, listening and processing this information. We used to have these spreadsheets where, you literally take client feedback and you actually like sit down and think about it, and not just say, oh yeah, fine, this is what you're saying. And I think for me, that's been absolutely crucial. I actually really care about what these people are going through. I really want to learn. And I think that's really a crucial part of networking, is that, I definitely care about what they're saying. And it's really helped me, because then, the other thing that I would say is that something that I've realized over the years is that people actually generally want to help, right? A lot of times it's really hard to ask for, somebody to reach out and cold call, and a lot of times we don't get a response. But I've been actually really surprised that even now when I reach out to people that I've networked over the years, people say, just ask. If you need something, just ask. And a lot of times you say, oh yeah, fine, maybe you don't mean it, but I think generally people really want to help. And so I try to approach it from two different sides. It's like, for me, I care about people. I really try to, connections or whatever it is. And same goes the other way.
Makes sense. There's a lot of similarities there between what you have done, what you're doing now, and what we do on a daily basis in recruiting. You know, it's all about asking questions and actually caring about the person who's on the other side of the phone. So it's that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that insight. Now, I kind of have a feeling as where you're going to go with this, just based on the fact you were a part of a startup environment before. But when it comes to our careers, most of us are risk adverse. You took that leap, went out on your own. What's that been like? And I mean, really, what was the motivation and how's it been?
So I'm actually incredibly risk averse. I grew up I was born in Soviet Russia. I literally was in elementary school when the Soviet Union collapsed. My family didn't have any money, just like most of the other family members, you know, tough times. And then we immigrated to the US, and again was, you know, when I was in high school. And so from my perspective, I actually have incredible risk aversion, broadly speaking, in all kinds of areas of my life. So now what gives, right? The reality is that I probably, because of the fear and because of this risk aversion, not only do I strongly believe that the industry, and we just talked about it too right before this, the Facebook Live, is that the industry is really ripe for transformation and disruption. I've seen it in all kinds of areas of finance. For background, as an example, my father actually works in equities market making technology. So he has been at almost every single firm on Wall Street with the sole purpose of, you know, automating their equity sales desk, right? So I've seen that from my family, and I've seen what debt capital markets is, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. But I know that the industry is there, so it better be me doing this, or, you know, I'm just going to be left out. And so for me, it's probably was actually that risk aversion and that fear that led me to starting this. At the same time, I would say the hugest motivation is when you talk to treasurers, you know, you talk to funding managers, you talk to CFOs, and they say, oh my God, it's great. I would say that one of the first people that I spoke to on the corporate side, it's a Fortune 100 corporation, their CFO. You know what he told me? He's like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll go in with you 50-50. And that was the moment of conviction for me, that somebody like that is actually willing to back me up. So, Joe, I would say it's a combination of fear for this disruption that I see coming. And actually, one thing that I'll also add, so I spoke about Spencer being one of the biggest influences in my life. So Spencer actually, right now, is a COO of a bond trading company called LTX. They're owned by Broadridge. And so you can think about an individual like that who's built up that business in a very, very successful way, to the point where MUFG is now in the top 10 league tables for bonds. And now what he is doing, so you can kind of see what he is thinking as well. And for me, that's really significant. So I took a cue from that. And, you know, I took a lot of the motivation from the CFOs and corporate treasurers who are, you know, kind of saying, yeah, I'll help you in any kind of way.
Olga, you and I are very similar in a lot of ways. I'm absolutely driven by fear of failure and wanted to do my own thing. And, you know, it's what drives me every day. But when you see an opportunity, you know, the US business for me was one where I just looked at it and went, I can't believe there's no one who does what I do in the US. I've got to have a piece of that. So I totally understand. But fear drives me every day, you know, fear of failure. So I'm with you on that one. Can I just ask as well, how have those relationships and the networking that you did in your banking days benefited you as an entrepreneur?
Oh, 100%. I would say in terms of, well, even broadly speaking. So my network, when I started InterPrice, that's when I realized the power of it. Just because when I was a banker, you know, you get the client coverage, you talk to the clients and, you know, a specific list of clients, and there are opportunities for networking outside of that. But at the same time, you don't actually realize how much of a network you're building just through your day job. But even fast, you know, to kind of backtrack, I think about network in terms of almost like pods. So I've been fortunate enough, for example, to graduate from Princeton, which has a huge alumni following. I never realized the power of that network and the power of outreach and the power of community, so to speak, until I started InterPrice. I would say that, you know, even our advisory board right now, some of the people like Alex Leventhal, right, who is one of the most powerful women on Wall Street, David Knopf, who is the former CFO of Kraft Heinz. So people like that who are alumni through that network who, you know, join me in this venture, so to speak. And then from the client side, that's another pod, right? for me. And the network kind of built very naturally. And I would say I have a number of corporations who are almost like checking in to say, you know, what can I do? How can I help you? We talked a little bit about before this about how the corporations are actually helping me push the banks on the platform too. And that's huge. And I would say that that's been one of the most, I guess, influential sources for me in terms of just taking the network, reaching out. And generally what I actually found is that, you know, kind of going back to my network example, is that people really, really want to help. They want to see others succeed. And, you know, for me, that's been incredibly influential. And just to even add to that, I've been incredibly surprised how many stakeholders we actually were able to get for the business. How many people have reached out and said, you know, even outside of the clients, you know, former colleagues. One of the biggest influencing factors actually for me in starting InterPrice too, besides even the treasury teams, when I used to run deals on the debt capital market side, what you do is when you run a deal, you face off other banks, right? So the corporation mandates several book runners. And so it's for other people, for example, that you shouldn't really be friends with, and now you're competitors and you're not talking to each other before, and all of a sudden the corporations, somebody from the treasury team says, hey, now you're running this deal. So you're somehow supposed to befriend them really quickly and try to work with them. And so one of the people who I constantly faced against was this woman named Leona Barba. So Leona was at JP Morgan doing kind of the same thing that I was doing. I met her at several events. She covered the same clients. And Leona since then has actually transitioned to JP Morgan's disruptive commerce unit. And the power of that network, the power of me reaching out to her, even though she was a complete competitor, to reach out. And she was one of the first people who said, you totally should do this, and I'll help in any way that I can. And so to me, I guess what I'm trying to say is perhaps the power of the network has definitely been there. And I've been incredibly surprised by how people want to become stakeholders and how helpful they are, truly. It's been absolutely tremendous experience from that perspective.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought up the Princeton network too, because we get a lot of questions around, should I pursue my CFA? Should I pursue my CTP? You know, should I continue with an MBA? And my advice is always, and my belief behind it has always been, not only are you investing in yourself from the education piece, but you're essentially, it opens up a new network to you of like-minded professionals that you just never would have thought existed, or you wouldn't have had access to before. So that's really cool that that's paid off. And obviously the value of networking has been crucial for you. And one of the learning, it sounds like one of the biggest takeaways for you, but what else have you learned along the entrepreneurial journey? It sounds like you've developed a lot of confidence in yourself. You've gotten past the fear a little bit. I know it's still there, but what else has gone on, or what else have you learned along the way?
I think the biggest thing is that when I was a banker, right, you work a lot, but the day kind of goes like this, right? So you travel a lot, you're always on the plane. But even when you're running a deal, the deal is kind of run by a syndicate. And so your day, you know, you might have some kind of bumps along the way, or some really cool moments when you win a transaction, you win a mandate. But overall, it's fairly steady. In a startup environment, the lows are very low and the highs are very high. It's almost like an emotional roller coaster every single day. I would say that, you know, we're still trying to figure out how to work with the team. We're still trying to build out the team. We're still trying to figure out all the relationships with everybody. We're going after a lot of different clients at any point in time. And sometimes, you know, if something breaks, so literally when we first onboarded the client, you know, something actually did break slightly, and imagine, you know, it was a really, really interesting night I think for all of us, and we fixed it quickly, but that's fine. And it's exactly what the pilot program is for. However, on the high side, when you get these clients onboarded, when you get on the phone with the client, so we actually have one of the first pilot clients that we onboarded, which is a Fortune 500 corporation. And we got on the phone with them a couple of days ago, and we noticed that they're using the platform every single day. So they're actually remembering to use it, which is really, really nice. And you get on the phone with them, and the first thing that they say is like, yeah, guys, we get what you're doing, right? We get it. And that kind of feedback, just because you have such a large stake in this and you feel like you put your heart and soul into it, and the entire team, I'm actually really, really proud of my team for this. It's literally everybody giving their like 150%. And we're going at 110 miles an hour. And sometimes it's like, what is going on? You know, you step away for an hour and there's just crazy stuff that happened. But we share in these highs together. I feel like our first client, so the first time that we actually onboarded a client, the entire team literally watched. And we have a couple of developers overseas, and they were up at night, and they were like, well, we just want to see it. We want to see them like use it. and they joked, they're like, nobody has ever been so excited to see like the client push a button. But we're all in this together. But what I would say is that the biggest thing for me, just the difference is this volatility that's constantly there. I'm sure you guys maybe see some of this too, just given the team that you have. But the celebrations, but also some of the lows when you're like, oh my God.
No, absolutely. The highs and the lows are the reason, like the lows being that much lower, the highs being that much higher. That's the reason why I got out of the corporate environment. And it's just like, it's that adrenaline rush, and you're able to problem solve, you're able to do all that type of stuff. And that's why I absolutely love the startup environments too.
Yeah, I would say too, I mean, for us, it's interesting to hear you say that, Olga, because that's in large part just, you know, the recruiting space. We also, I think everybody here can relate to the fact that that we go through that too, and you have to try to strike that even keel, right? You don't want to let those lows or highs overtake you. But I think the big reveal here for everyone, and I'm sure that those watching live on Facebook are wondering this as well. Can you just give us a high level overview of what is InterPrice? You know, what do you guys do? And I guess, yeah, insofar as you can give a high level of this, what gave you this idea?
So the idea came from somebody at Caterpillar Financial. So I'll reveal the name. He'll know who he is if he's watching it. So I had a conversation with somebody from there, somebody from the Treasury team. And I said, okay, so talk to me about how you actually deal with these bankers, right? So my day job as a debt capital markets banker is to provide you with an indicative quote for your financing. A very similar idea for people who are not, you know, doing this every single day is to say, for example, if you wanted to take out a mortgage on a house, right? If you wanted to buy a house, you want a mortgage, you go to a website, bankrate.com, or any other website, Rocket Mortgage, whatever, and you see 15-year mortgage, 30-year mortgage, a whole bunch of banks quoting you, and you know, you call up one of those banks and you can pretty much get to the rate that's shown on there. When you're a large corporation, you want to refi your debt or you want to buy another corporation, you need to finance it somehow. So the job of a debt capital markets banker is literally to tell you, you know, some of the structures or pretty much the rate. So you want, simplistic idea is that you want to do a 10-year bond. You want to borrow money for 10 years from investors. And me as a banker is going to put a nice little PDF document and send it to you with your 10-year pricing and all kinds of bells and whistles on it. So now imagine Caterpillar, right? So Caterpillar is a good example of somebody who works with about 30 banks or so, right? They have 30 relationship banks. Imagine every single bank is sending this to them on a weekly basis. And these PDFs are all different. And so I sat down with this person, and by the way, they also get the same thing from the loans team. They also get the same thing from interest rate team and commercial paper team. I mean, we can multiply this 30 by many, many numbers at this point. All that is to get, you know, a clear picture of your financing costs. I sat down with the Caterpillar and I said, look, so talk to me. How are you actually managing all of this? And he's like, oh, but who are you kidding? Like, I'm not. We pick our favorites and kind of track those guys. And, you know, we talk to the banks and, you know, but, you know, we store some of this in a spreadsheet, but not necessarily all 30. And so then I talked to the person that you had on the podcast, Yang Zhu from Kraft Heinz, and I said, well, Yang, how are you doing this? And she's like, you know, when before the financing, like about 5 weeks before, like we really track it. But outside of that, you know, maybe I'll glance at it because I'm not doing it, but I don't have the exact clear picture, but I would love to, because you have a guy like David Knopf, who is the former CFO of Kraft Heinz, calling me and saying, oh, well, you know, somebody from the corporate finance department called, they want to do this acquisition modeling, so where are the financing costs? And Yang is stuck looking through her email, literally, to do this. And so, and by the way, as I mentioned, David Knopf is on our advisory board, and so for a reason, And so what if at the very basic idea, we can just aggregate all of this, right? The very, very basic first step, and we'll go and, talk a little bit about what else we've done. But such that when you're a corporation, you log in, you see all the banks, you see all the structures, you can filter through all of it, tracks historically, you're actually allowed to optimize for this. You can say, you can model it out in terms of what it would look like if you issued a bond. You can also do other cool stuff like bank's accuracy, right? So if I'm a bank, I'm pricing your deal, I'm sending you these PDFs, and all of a sudden you do a deal. How has my pricing been relative to where you actually had done it? And then the final thing that we're doing, which is, that's the disruption piece besides this very first step, is to say, well, what if we actually connect you to the investors directly, confidentially, right? So right now the banks are serving as middlemen, and that's fine. It works really well, and we can, create a lot of transparency there. But what if I can actually connect you to investors? They submit confidential reverse inquiries, another pool of capital, more transparency, and that's really the disruptive piece. So, but I hope it makes sense in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. The ultimate goal is for somebody like Yang to go into the platform and to say, okay, so I don't have to look through any of these emails. I can literally have my financing cost at my fingertips at any point in time. It's all updated. We can actually refresh it real time. And it plays, I'm sure I don't have to convince you guys that it plays into every single decision for them. And if we can actually, as the very last step, figure out the report that gets fed into the Treasury cash management system, and connects into anything like Reval or Kariba, that's an extra step and extra benefit as well.
So Olga, just if I'm hearing you correctly, then you obviously save Treasury folk a lot of time, and you're giving them visibility on a sort of a one pager. What other value does InterPrice provide for treasurers? So
at that very basic level, I think that the goal of the corporation has always been to give you the better pricing through transparency. So a good example is, let's talk about a couple of really extreme examples. So say you're Walmart, right? So Walmart is a very high rated issuer. Walmart team knows exactly what its cost of capital, where its bonds are trading. They're incredibly sophisticated. One of the reasons that several years ago, I actually won a big mandate for a global yen deal for Walmart at that time was actually because we were only able to save them about, I want to say at that point, and gosh, I hope they don't quote me on this, but about 50 basis points or so, right? And the whole time for about 2 months, I was praying every day at home that the basis doesn't move away from us. But Walmart is literally so precise that every single basis point counts. So imagine the transparency that they can get from all the banks, figure out who the banks are, that they want to mandate, figure out all, real-time information that's absolutely crucial. And they save even a couple of basis points. We actually did this model in the Walmart deal. So Walmart saves maybe half a basis point of interest expense. That's equivalent to $5 million in interest rate savings. But then let's look at another example. Let's look at somebody who doesn't issue very frequently. Somebody maybe, crossover, high yield credit, maybe a private placement issuer. Arguably, they're not getting as much banking coverage. And also, they don't necessarily have the comparables, the very liquid comparables that trade, that serve as a benchmark for investors. In that point, what they're getting is banks coming to them and saying, look, I'm modeling your credit. I think this is where you would approximately price. But the deviation, we have one pilot customer who says, look, the deviation can be 75 basis points, maybe 1%. So how am I supposed to figure this out? How am I supposed to mandate the banks? And so you can see how the transparency can actually save even more costs there. But the biggest thing also is that, what about the fixed income investors, right? So as a good example is, somebody like Walmart, right? So they go and deal with banks, they price their deals, they issue, and all of a sudden they get a confidential reverse inquiry from, say, BlackRock. They don't know that it's BlackRock on the platform until they sign an NDA with BlackRock. But imagine that they see this, and imagine that they see the price. They have several things that they can do. First, they can ignore it. Second, they can actually say, okay, but I'm doing a deal, and next time I do a deal and one of the banks runs it, I'm going to call them and say, hey guys, you saw this order, right? I'm going to make sure, and the information is power, because the more orders, obviously, the better the pricing. Or I can call one of the banks and say, hey guys, I have this order. I know that the price is good. I signed the confidentiality. I know who it is. I'm bringing it to you. Guess how much I'm paying you? Maybe half a fee. And you can see where the savings add up. And so this transparency, I mean, we can talk about all the other ways, but I, don't want to bore you guys into detail about like bank ratings and everything else and the accuracy, but I hope that makes sense. So this transparency is really about you pricing, you paying better interest expense, better cost savings, and figuring out your financing, like literally at the fingertips, real time.
Absolutely. That's I know the confusion around trying to navigate email while you're on the phone is certainly something that plagues everyone on this call or in this meeting. So we all have our challenges with Windows 10. So that's the value in itself. I love it.
Thank you.
Donnie, have we got any questions coming in from the listeners? Because I think that pretty much
no
covers
questions coming in yet, but Olga, if somebody was interested in learning more about your platform, what would be the next best way for them to, what's the next step for them?
Reach out. InterPriceTech.com is our platform. You can also email me directly, Olga@InterPriceTech.com. I would absolutely love any kind of feedback. There's a contact form on the website. We get it automatically. So, I'm always looking for feedback. We're actually at that stage right now where we could use as much helpful feedback as possible. So we literally collect it, and then we decide, as a team, we decide what we can implement, what we can't implement right now. So anything at all, please reach out. Always welcome.
Excellent. Sounds good. So head over to enterprise.com, give her a little feedback. Just for starters, that's excellent. Olga, thank you for being here. I mean, what would you say at this point? What are you excited about most? That's coming up next for the business.
So in terms of the platform, I'm really excited to actually get the banks on board. That's been my big thing. So I spoke to you guys about this right before the chat. So the way that it works right now is that we have a bunch of treasury teams that are really supportive, and we build out this feature where, they can still use it without the banks. The platform is 100% usable. We get the data anyway through their upload of whatever information you get from the banks. But the beautiful feature that took our developer maybe half a day to build, it's really, really easy, is this contact form. So literally the treasury team signs in and they say, okay, well, here's the list of my banks, it's in settings. And here I can actually just put in the email of the banking coverage, and they get an email saying, hey guys, thank you for covering us for the past years. It's, it's a little personalized. There's some nice things that they say about them. And they say from now on, going forward, you can submit your pricing through this platform as secure and confidential, and we're using it, so we want you to submit it. Now, imagine the bank getting that email, right? It's no longer me asking, because me knocking on the doors of banks is really, it is hard. It depends on who the team is, but it is hard because it is a bit of a disruption to the workflow, despite the fact that it has a lot of benefits from them as well. But that is incredibly powerful. And people start asking questions. They're like, well, but this is a really big client, so what can we say to them, right? And having that backing has been, I'm so thankful for that from the bottom of my heart. And the fact that we haven't even, that idea actually came from a first pilot customer. So when he signed up initially, that feature was not there. And he's like, yeah, I'll just tell the banks to use it. And I'm like, well, how? Well, okay, build this contact form. Okay, so we build a contact form. It sounds so simple. It is ridiculously simple. And yet, our so we get the notification every time that happens in our Slack channel. And for example, yesterday it was about 10 different emails. So like at this point, Morgan Stanley, Citi, all these banks got emails from clients. And it's going to be super interesting. I think the psychology of it absolutely fascinates me. I'm really curious to see what happens.
That's the validation right there, right? It's you have other people selling your service or your product for you, and I can only imagine the amount of pride that came out of that as you were reading through those emails.
Well, I think I've expected some network effects, but this was amazing to see. Our whole team, our developer and one of our developers was like, are you guys testing this feature? Or is it like, no, this is real. I actually know some of these people. So it's interesting. So I'll keep you guys posted on this too. But that's something that we're watching over the next few months for sure.
Excellent. Scotty, Joe, Simon, anybody have any last questions?
No, just thank you for coming on, Olga. It's fascinating to learn what you're, what you're doing with InterPrice, and also a little bit about your background. We wish you all the best, and of course, we'll promote this as best we can to our audience, because obviously there's a ton of value that they can get from it. So thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Olga. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us again. If you enjoyed this interview, please drop a like for us. Leave a comment on what you enjoyed with Olga's journey, and make sure to head over to her website and give that a look for her, give her a little bit of feedback, and sounds like there's a possibility it could make an impact on any organization. So like I said earlier, we are Treasury recruitment specialists, and we have these live interviews every single week, telling stories about people in the industry, how they're getting there, what they're doing in their careers to be successful. And we thank you guys for joining us every week and interacting with us on here. So we will be back here next Wednesday at 3 o'clock Pacific time. Until then, we'll talk to everybody soon.